And this is where the story becomes even more fascinating, because when we look deeper into the relationship between the heart and the brain, we discover that the heart is doing far more than pumping blood through the body. Hidden within its rhythmic activity is a vast network of intelligence that continuously gathers information, interprets experience, and influences the way we think, feel, and respond to life. Scientists have identified tens of thousands of specialized cells within the heart that function in ways remarkably similar to neurons. These cells communicate with the brain through a constant stream of signals, creating a two-way conversation that never stops. What surprises many people is that the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. In other words, the heart is not simply following orders, it is actively participating in the process of perception. When I first encountered this idea, it challenged one of the most deeply rooted assumptions in modern culture, that intelligence exists only inside the brain. Yet the evidence points toward a much more integrated reality. The body is not a collection of separate systems operating independently. It is a living network of communication. Every thought influences chemistry. Every emotion influences biology. Every experience leaves traces throughout the nervous system. The heart occupies a unique position within this network because it sits at the crossroads of emotion, physiology, and awareness. Think about moments when you instantly knew something before you could explain it logically. Perhaps you met someone and sensed trust immediately. Perhaps you walked into a situation that felt wrong, even though nothing appeared unusual on the surface. Many people describe these experiences as intuition. What is fascinating is that studies suggest the body often begins responding to future events milliseconds before the conscious mind becomes aware of them. The heart appears to be deeply involved in this process. Long before the analytical mind finishes its calculations, the heart may already be registering patterns that the brain has not yet translated into conscious thought. This does not mean we should abandon reason or critical thinking, quite the opposite. The greatest potential emerges when the intelligence of the heart and the intelligence of the brain work together. The challenge is that most people have been trained to trust only one side of the equation. We are taught to analyze, compare, and calculate. These abilities are valuable, but when logic becomes disconnected from feeling, something essential is lost. Decisions become efficient, but not necessarily wise. We may achieve goals while feeling strangely disconnected from ourselves. We may accumulate success while sensing an absence of fulfillment. Ancient cultures understood this balance in a way that modern society is only beginning to rediscover. Across different civilizations, the heart was often viewed as a center of wisdom rather than merely an organ. While they lacked the scientific instruments available today, they observed human behavior closely. They recognized that the quality of a person's emotional state influenced perception, relationships, and health. What modern research is revealing is that these observations may have reflected genuine biological realities. One of the most important discoveries involves coherence. When the heart rhythm becomes smooth, ordered, and balanced, profound changes occur throughout the body. Stress hormones decrease, cognitive function improves, emotional stability increases, the immune system performs more efficiently, the brain itself begins operating differently. In coherent states, communication between major systems becomes more synchronized. The body essentially shifts from internal conflict toward internal cooperation. I find it remarkable that coherence is not created through force. It cannot be achieved by demanding that the body relax. It emerges when our thoughts, emotions, and physiological processes begin aligning with one another. Gratitude, appreciation, compassion, and genuine care are among the emotional states most strongly associated with this pattern. These emotions are not merely pleasant feelings, they generate measurable changes in the body's electrical and magnetic activity. This brings us to another extraordinary aspect of the heart. The electromagnetic field produced by the heart is significantly stronger than the field generated by the brain. Sensitive instruments can detect this field several feet away from the body. While researchers continue exploring the full implications of this phenomenon, the existence of the field itself raises intriguing questions. If the heart generates a powerful electromagnetic signature that changes according to emotional states, then our inner world may be influencing our environment in ways we are only beginning to understand. Consider what happens during moments of genuine connection with another person. Sometimes words are unnecessary. You can sense their emotional condition before they speak. You may feel uplifted in the presence of someone who radiates calm confidence. Conversely, you may feel drained after spending time with someone consumed by fear or anger. While many factors contribute to these experiences, the heart's field may play a role in the subtle exchange of information occurring between people. What makes this especially important is that emotions are not random events imposed upon us by external circumstances. They are biological signals carrying information about how we are relating to our experiences. When emotions become chronic, they begin shaping patterns within the nervous system. Over time, these patterns influence perception itself. Two people can encounter the same situation and interpret it completely differently because their internal states are filtering reality through different lenses. The heart appears to function as a bridge between these internal patterns and the external world. Every heartbeat carries information. Every emotional state influences the messages being transmitted throughout the body. If we spend years reinforcing fear, resentment, or hopelessness, those patterns become familiar pathways. The body learns them. The nervous system expects them. The heart reflects them. But the opposite is also true. When we intentionally cultivate elevated emotional states, we begin creating new biological conditions, new neural associations, and new possibilities for perception. This may explain why meaningful transformation rarely begins with external circumstances alone. Lasting change often starts when something shifts within us first. The heart becomes part of that shift, not as a metaphor, but as an active participant in the process. The more we understand this relationship, the more we realize that intelligence is not confined to the brain. It is distributed throughout the body, expressed through networks of communication that connect thought, emotion, and physiology into a single living system. And when we begin learning how to listen to that system more carefully, we may discover that some of the answers we have been searching for were never hidden at all. They were being communicated through every heartbeat, waiting for us to recognize that awareness begins not only with what we think, but with the subtle signals we have been feeling all along. As the conversation between heart and consciousness continues to reveal more layers of understanding than most people ever imagine. The deeper I explore this relationship, the clearer it becomes that the heart is not simply responding to our lives. It is helping shape the way our lives are experienced. Every moment, the heart is translating emotion into biology, turning invisible feelings into measurable physical signals that travel throughout the body. This process is happening whether we are aware of it or not, which means that our internal emotional environment may be influencing far more than our moods. It may be influencing the quality of our perception itself. One of the most overlooked realities of human experience is that we do not see the world exactly as it is. We see the world through the filters created by our beliefs, memories, expectations, and emotional patterns. The brain processes enormous amounts of information every second, yet only a tiny fraction reaches conscious awareness. The question then becomes, what determines which information is selected and which information is ignored? Increasingly, research suggests that emotional states play a powerful role in directing attention. The heart, through its continuous communication with the brain, may be influencing this process in ways that are both subtle and profound. Imagine waking up after a night of anxiety and uncertainty. The body feels tense, the breathing is shallow, the heart rhythm becomes irregular. In that state, the mind often focuses on threats, problems, and worst-case scenarios. Opportunities that might otherwise be visible remain unnoticed. Now compare that to a day when you feel deeply appreciative, centered, and emotionally balanced. The external world may not have changed dramatically, yet your experience of it changes completely. New possibilities become visible, creative solutions emerge, relationships feel easier. The difference is not only psychological, it is biological. This understanding challenges a common misconception about personal growth. Many people believe that change begins with thinking differently. While thought certainly matters, emotional patterns often operate beneath conscious thinking. A person may repeat positive statements for years while carrying unresolved emotional programs that continue generating the same results. The heart becomes an important gateway because it reflects these deeper emotional conditions more honestly than intellectual explanations ever can. I have noticed that whenever people experience genuine breakthroughs in their lives, the transformation rarely comes from information alone. Information can inspire, information can educate, but information does not necessarily create change. What creates change is a shift in emotional experience. The moment someone truly feels a new possibility, something begins to reorganize inside them. Their posture changes, their breathing changes, their heart rhythm changes, their choices begin changing as well. This may explain why some memories remain vivid for decades while countless ordinary experiences disappear. Emotion acts like a signal telling the nervous system what is important. The stronger the emotional significance, the more deeply the experience becomes embedded within the body's memory networks. The heart participates in this process continuously, helping connect emotional meaning to physical responses. What fascinates me most is how quickly these patterns can become self-reinforcing. A fearful emotion generates certain physiological responses. Those responses influence perception. Perception then finds evidence supporting the original fear. The cycle repeats itself. Over time, the body begins treating the pattern as normal. Many people spend years trapped inside emotional loops without realizing that their physiology has adapted to states that no longer serve them. Yet the same mechanism that creates limitation can also create transformation. The body is remarkably adaptable. New emotional experiences generate new biological responses. New biological responses create new possibilities for perception. This means that growth is not merely a mental exercise. It is a whole system process involving the heart, brain, nervous system, and every cell influenced by them. One reason gratitude practices have attracted so much scientific attention is that gratitude appears capable of interrupting old emotional cycles. Genuine appreciation shifts physiological activity in measurable ways. The heart rhythm becomes more coherent. Stress responses decrease. Communication between major systems improves. What begins as a simple emotional state gradually influences larger patterns throughout the body. The key word here is genuine. The body responds to authentic experience, not forced performance. Pretending to feel something rarely produces the same effects as truly experiencing it. This is why self-awareness becomes so important. Before we can transform emotional patterns, we must first recognize them. We must become observers of our own internal landscape. Many people spend their lives mastering the external world while remaining strangers to their internal world. They learn how to manage schedules, careers, responsibilities, and obligations, yet never fully understand the emotional currents shaping their decisions. The heart quietly records these currents. It reflects stress, excitement, fear, trust, confidence, and countless other states long before the conscious mind develops a narrative about them. When we begin paying attention to these signals, a different kind of intelligence emerges. Instead of reacting automatically, we become capable of responding intentionally. We start noticing the difference between emotional impulses that arise from old conditioning and deeper signals that point toward growth. This distinction can be life-changing because not every feeling deserves immediate action, yet every feeling contains information. The relationship between information and wisdom is crucial. Information tells us what is happening. Wisdom helps us understand what it means. The brain excels at processing information. The heart contributes something equally important, context. It helps determine significance. It influences priorities. It shapes meaning. Together, these systems create a more complete form of intelligence than either could provide alone. As modern science continues exploring the hidden communication networks within the human body, an extraordinary picture is beginning to emerge. The old model of a brain issuing commands to passive organs is gradually giving way to a more interconnected vision of human functioning. The heart is not separate from consciousness. It is woven into the fabric of conscious experience itself. Every emotional state influences its signals. Every signal influences the larger system. And because those signals are constantly changing, our capacity for transformation remains available in every moment. Perhaps this is one of the most empowering discoveries of all. We are not permanently defined by past emotional patterns. We are not trapped by previous conditioning. The body possesses an incredible ability to adapt when provided with new experiences and new emotional inputs. The heart becomes a doorway into that possibility, a living bridge connecting biology with awareness, physiology with perception, and experience with meaning. The more we learn to work with this intelligence instead of against it, the more we begin recognizing that what we call reality is shaped not only by the events occurring around us, but also by the signals flowing within us every second. And when those signals become aligned with a deeper sense of clarity and coherence, something remarkable starts to happen because the boundaries between perception and creation begin to appear far less rigid than we once believed. At that point, we begin to recognize that human experience is not simply a passive reaction to circumstances. It is an ongoing interaction between our inner world and the reality we encounter each day. The heart stands at the center of this interaction, translating emotional states into biological instructions that influence how we perceive, respond, and ultimately shape the direction of our lives. What becomes increasingly clear is that perception is not a fixed process. Most people assume that reality arrives fully formed and that the mind merely observes it. Yet modern neuroscience paints a different picture. The brain is constantly predicting, interpreting, and constructing meaning from incomplete information. The heart contributes to this process by continuously informing the brain about the body's internal condition. In a very real sense, how we feel influences what we notice, and what we notice influences how we feel. Together, these processes create a feedback loop that can either limit us or expand us. I find it fascinating that two individuals can stand in the same environment, hear the same words, and witness the same events, yet walk away with entirely different experiences. Their interpretations are shaped not only by thoughts, but by emotional patterns that have been developing over years. The heart participates in these patterns every moment. It responds to memories, expectations, and subconscious beliefs, often before conscious awareness catches up. This may explain why some opportunities seem invisible to one person and obvious to another. The difference is not always intelligence, education, or skill. Sometimes the difference lies in the internal state through which reality is being filtered. A mind operating under chronic stress tends to narrow its focus. It prioritizes survival, scans for danger, and conserves energy. A mind supported by emotional coherence often becomes more creative, adaptable, and open to possibility. The external world may remain unchanged, but the field of perception expands dramatically. This is where the conversation moves beyond theory and into practical application. If emotional states influence perception, and perception influences behavior, then learning to regulate our internal state becomes one of the most powerful skills we can develop. Not because it guarantees specific outcomes, but because it changes the quality of our engagement with life itself. Many people attempt to change their lives by focusing exclusively on external conditions. They wait for circumstances to improve before allowing themselves to feel peace, confidence, or appreciation. Yet the body often works in the opposite direction. Internal states influence external behaviors, which eventually influence outcomes. When we learn to cultivate coherence first, we begin creating conditions that support different choices and different results. This does not mean ignoring challenges or pretending difficulties do not exist. True coherence is not denial. It is the ability to remain internally balanced while acknowledging reality honestly. In fact, some of the most resilient individuals are not those who avoid hardship. They are those who maintain emotional stability in the presence of uncertainty. Their hearts and minds continue communicating effectively even when circumstances become difficult. The reason this matters is because stress affects more than emotions. It influences memory, attention, decision-making, and physical health. When stress becomes chronic, the body can begin functioning as though danger is permanent. Over time, this state consumes energy that could otherwise support creativity, learning, and growth. The heart reflects this shift immediately. Its rhythms become less ordered, and communication throughout the body becomes less efficient. By contrast, moments of emotional balance create very different physiological conditions. Breathing deepens naturally, muscles relax, cognitive flexibility increases, the nervous system becomes more responsive rather than reactive. These changes may appear subtle, but their cumulative effect over months and years can be extraordinary. What intrigues me most is that many of these shifts begin with awareness. Before transformation becomes visible externally, it often starts as a small internal realization. A person notices a recurring emotional pattern. They become aware of a belief they have carried for years. They recognize a reaction that no longer serves them. That moment of awareness creates space between stimulus and response. Within that space lies choice. The heart plays a crucial role here because it provides immediate feedback about our internal condition. Long before we analyze a situation intellectually, the body responds. The heart rate changes, breathing shifts, muscles tighten or relax. These signals offer valuable information about what is happening beneath conscious thought. Learning to recognize them can transform the way we navigate daily life. Imagine treating every emotional response not as an enemy to suppress, but as information to understand. Fear may reveal a perceived threat. Frustration may point toward an unmet need. Excitement may highlight a meaningful opportunity. The goal is not to be controlled by emotions, nor is it to eliminate them. The goal is to develop a relationship with them that allows their information to be useful, rather than overwhelming. As this relationship deepens, something remarkable often occurs. We begin experiencing less conflict between what we think and what we feel. Decisions become clearer, actions become more aligned. Energy that was previously consumed by internal contradiction becomes available for growth and creativity. The heart and brain begin functioning more like partners than competitors. This partnership may represent one of the most important frontiers in understanding human potential. For centuries, discussions about intelligence focused primarily on reasoning and analytical thought. Those capacities remain invaluable. Yet a broader view is emerging, one that recognizes intelligence as a whole-body phenomenon involving emotion, physiology, perception, and awareness working together. The implications extend far beyond personal development. They influence leadership, communication, relationships, education, and health. Every interaction we have is shaped by the state we bring into it. Every decision reflects not only what we know, but also how we feel. The heart contributes to these processes continuously, whether we acknowledge it or not. Perhaps this is why moments of genuine insight often feel different from ordinary thinking. They arrive with a sense of clarity that seems to involve the entire body. We do not merely understand them intellectually, we feel their truth. Something aligns internally. The mind recognizes it, but the heart seems to know it simultaneously. These experiences hint at a deeper form of intelligence operating beneath the surface of conscious thought. As researchers continue uncovering the hidden conversations taking place between the heart and brain, we may find ourselves revising some of our oldest assumptions about human consciousness. The evidence increasingly suggests that awareness is not confined to a single location within the body. Instead, it emerges from dynamic networks of communication that connect emotion, biology, perception, and meaning into a unified experience. And if that is true, then every heartbeat may be participating in a process far more profound than circulation alone, serving as a messenger within a vast internal dialogue that influences how we interpret reality, how we relate to ourselves, and how we engage with possibilities that remain just beyond the edge of what we currently understand. Because the moment we begin listening carefully to that dialogue, we start noticing patterns that reveal an entirely new dimension of human experience. These patterns are often so subtle that they escape our attention during the noise of everyday life. Yet when we slow down enough to observe them, we begin noticing that many of the most important moments in our lives were preceded by signals we felt before we could explain them. A sense of certainty, a quiet hesitation, an unexpected feeling of connection. These experiences are frequently dismissed as coincidence, yet they may represent the language through which deeper levels of intelligence communicate. What I find remarkable is that this intelligence rarely appears dramatic or forceful. It does not compete with the analytical mind by shouting louder. Instead, it often arrives as a quiet knowing beneath the surface of thought. The challenge is that modern life conditions us to prioritize constant mental activity. We are trained to seek answers through endless analysis, comparison, and prediction. While these abilities have tremendous value, they can also create a kind of internal static that drowns out more subtle forms of awareness. The heart operates differently. Its communication is immediate and direct. It responds in real time to our experiences, reflecting emotional truths that may not yet be visible to the conscious mind. This is why people sometimes recognize they were unhappy in a situation long before they admitted it to themselves intellectually. The body knew, the heart was already sending signals. The mind simply had not interpreted them yet. As we become more attentive to these signals, an interesting shift begins to occur. We stop viewing emotions as obstacles to clear thinking and start recognizing them as sources of information. Not every emotion reflects objective reality, of course. Emotions can be influenced by past experiences, assumptions, and conditioning. Yet even when they are imperfect reflections of the present moment, they still reveal something important about our internal state. This understanding invites a different approach to self-awareness. Instead of asking only, what am I thinking, we also begin asking, what am I feeling and why? The answer to that second question often reveals layers of information that logic alone cannot access. It uncovers hidden motivations, unresolved patterns, and subconscious expectations that influence behavior in powerful ways. Many of these patterns are established early in life. Repeated emotional experiences shape neural pathways and physiological responses. Over time, the body learns what to expect from the world. If a person repeatedly experiences uncertainty, they may develop heightened sensitivity to risk. If they repeatedly experience encouragement and trust, they may become more open to opportunity. These patterns are not destiny, but they can become deeply ingrained. The encouraging news is that the same systems capable of learning limitation are also capable of learning transformation. The nervous system remains adaptable throughout life. New experiences can create new pathways. New emotional states can influence new patterns of communication between the heart and brain. This adaptability is one of the greatest strengths of human biology. I often think about how much energy people spend fighting themselves internally. They want change, yet part of them fears it. They pursue new goals while carrying old emotional programs. They attempt to create different outcomes using the same internal patterns that produce previous results. This conflict generates enormous stress because different parts of the system are moving in different directions. Coherence offers an alternative. When thoughts, emotions, and actions begin aligning, resistance decreases. Energy that was previously consumed by internal contradiction becomes available for purposeful action. Progress feels less forced. Decisions become less exhausting. There is a sense of flow that emerges when the heart and brain are communicating effectively. This does not mean life suddenly becomes easy. Challenges remain, uncertainty remains, unexpected events remain. What changes is the way we meet those experiences. Instead of reacting from habit, we respond from awareness. Instead of being driven entirely by conditioned patterns, we gain access to greater choice. The concept of choice is central here because many people underestimate how much of daily behavior operates automatically. Habits, emotional reactions, and subconscious expectations influence countless decisions without conscious awareness. The heart's ongoing communication with the brain helps shape these processes. When emotional patterns become repetitive, they can reinforce familiar ways of thinking and behaving. Breaking those patterns often begins with something surprisingly simple: attention. The moment we become aware of an automatic response, we create the possibility of a different response. Awareness interrupts unconscious momentum. It introduces flexibility into systems that may have been operating on autopilot for years. This is one reason practices involving focused attention, reflection, and emotional regulation have attracted growing scientific interest. They appear capable of influencing heart rhythms, nervous system activity, and cognitive performance simultaneously. In other words, they support the very coherence that strengthens communication throughout the body. The implications extend beyond personal well-being. Consider relationships. Every conversation involves far more than words. Emotional states influence tone, body language, perception, and interpretation. A person operating from fear may hear criticism where none was intended. A person operating from trust may perceive the same interaction completely differently. The internal state becomes part of the communication itself. Leadership works the same way. People respond not only to information, but also to emotional signals. Confidence, clarity, and calmness can influence groups in ways that are difficult to quantify, yet easy to observe. The heart's role in generating coherent physiological states may contribute to these effects more than we currently realize. Even creativity appears connected to this dynamic. Many breakthroughs occur not during intense effort, but during moments of relaxation, openness, or inspiration. When stress decreases and coherence increases, the mind often gains access to new associations and perspectives. Solutions emerge that seemed impossible moments earlier. The heart and brain appear to function as a more integrated system, allowing information to flow more freely. The more we examine these connections, the harder it becomes to maintain the old separation between mind and body. Thoughts influence emotions, emotions influence physiology. Physiology influences perception, perception influences behavior, behavior influences experience. The entire system operates as an interconnected whole. This realization carries profound implications for how we understand consciousness itself. Rather than viewing awareness as something produced exclusively within the brain, we may begin seeing it as an emergent process involving multiple systems communicating continuously. The heart becomes more than a biological pump. It becomes an active participant in the experience of being human. And perhaps that is why the discovery of those tens of thousands of specialized heart cells captures so much attention. It challenges a familiar narrative and invites us to consider a more expansive one, a narrative in which intelligence is distributed, communication is constant, and the deepest insights emerge not from thought alone, but from the harmony of thought and feeling working together. As this understanding continues to evolve, we may find that some of the greatest breakthroughs in human potential will come not from adding more information to our lives, but from learning how to recognize the intelligence that has been speaking through us all along, quietly shaping our experiences through rhythms, signals, and patterns that reveal a level of wisdom we are only beginning to comprehend as the connection between heart, awareness, and human possibility continues to unfold in ways that suggest that our understanding of ourselves is still in its earliest stages. The more we uncover about the communication between the heart and the brain, the more apparent it becomes that human potential cannot be fully explained through mechanics alone. There is a depth to our experience that emerges from the interaction of biology, perception, emotion, and awareness. Each influences the others continuously, creating a dynamic system far more sophisticated than earlier models ever imagined. What interests me most is how this realization changes the way we view everyday life. The heart-brain connection is not relevant only in laboratories or scientific studies. It is active during every conversation, every decision, every moment of uncertainty, and every experience of joy. Whether we recognize it or not, we are constantly generating internal signals that influence the quality of our attention and the direction of our choices. Consider how often people search for certainty before taking action. They want complete confidence before making a change, pursuing an opportunity, or expressing what they truly feel. Yet certainty rarely arrives first. More often, what arrives first is a subtle sense of alignment, a feeling that something is right even before all the evidence is available. The analytical mind then begins gathering information to support or challenge that feeling. This process does not suggest abandoning logic. Rather, it suggests expanding our understanding of how intelligence operates. Logic provides structure. Emotion provides meaning. The heart helps integrate these dimensions into a coherent experience. When one dominates completely at the expense of the other, imbalance often follows. Pure emotion without reflection can become impulsive. Pure analysis without emotional awareness can become disconnected. Wisdom emerges when both systems contribute. One reason this balance is so difficult to maintain is that modern environments are often designed to keep attention focused externally. Notifications, deadlines, responsibilities, and constant streams of information pull awareness outward. Over time, many people become highly skilled at managing external demands while losing touch with internal signals. They know what is happening around them, but have little awareness of what is happening within them. Yet the quality of our inner state influences every aspect of our external experience. A stressed mind interprets events differently than a calm mind. An appreciative heart responds differently than a fearful one. The same situation can feel overwhelming or manageable depending on the internal conditions through which it is experienced. This understanding reveals something profound about resilience. Resilience is not merely the ability to endure difficulty, it is the ability to maintain internal coherence while moving through difficulty. People who develop this capacity are not immune to stress, disappointment, or uncertainty. They simply recover more effectively because their internal systems remain connected rather than fragmented. The heart appears to play a critical role in this process. When emotional coherence is present, communication throughout the body becomes more efficient, attention becomes clearer, decision-making improves. The nervous system shifts from a state of chronic defense toward a state that supports adaptation and learning. This creates conditions in which growth becomes more likely. Growth itself is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as a steady upward progression, but real transformation tends to occur in cycles. There are periods of clarity followed by periods of confusion, moments of insight followed by moments of doubt, expansion followed by integration. Throughout these cycles, the heart continuously reflects the emotional landscape accompanying each stage. I have often observed that the greatest breakthroughs come after periods when old patterns can no longer be sustained. Something within us recognizes that familiar ways of thinking or behaving are no longer sufficient. At first, this recognition can feel uncomfortable. It disrupts certainty. It challenges identity, yet it also creates space for something new to emerge. The heart's sensitivity to emotional truth makes it particularly important during these transitions. Long before a change becomes visible externally, the body often begins responding internally. A growing sense of restlessness, an unexpected feeling of possibility, a desire for greater alignment between values and actions. These signals may seem small, but they frequently precede significant transformations. Many people ignore such signals because they appear irrational or inconvenient. The mind seeks predictable explanations, while the heart often communicates through feelings that are difficult to quantify. However, when we consistently dismiss these signals, we may overlook valuable information about the direction of our own growth. This does not mean every feeling should be followed blindly. Discernment remains essential. Emotional signals are most useful when combined with reflection, awareness, and thoughtful evaluation. The goal is not to replace reason, but to enrich it. When the heart and brain work together, decisions tend to reflect both intelligence and authenticity. Authenticity is another concept closely connected to coherence. Whenever there is a significant gap between what we feel and how we live, tension develops within the system. Maintaining that gap requires energy. Over time, the strain can affect emotional well-being, relationships, and even physical health. Alignment reduces this strain because actions begin reflecting deeper truths rather than external expectations alone. Perhaps this is why people often describe meaningful life changes as feeling liberating despite the challenges involved. The circumstances may become more complex, yet the internal conflict decreases. Energy that was previously spent maintaining contradictions becomes available for creativity, connection, and purposeful action. The implications extend beyond individual experience. Every community, organization, and relationship consists of people whose internal states influence collective outcomes. Emotional coherence can support cooperation, trust, and innovation. Chronic stress and disconnection can contribute to conflict and misunderstanding. Understanding the heart's role in shaping these dynamics may eventually transform how we approach leadership, education, and human development. What excites me most is that this field of exploration remains far from complete. Each new discovery seems to reveal additional questions. How exactly do emotional states influence perception? What mechanisms connect physiological coherence with enhanced cognitive performance? To what extent do interpersonal interactions involve exchanges of information beyond spoken language? Researchers continue investigating these questions, and the answers may reshape our understanding of consciousness itself. For now, what seems increasingly clear is that the heart cannot be viewed solely as a mechanical organ. It participates in communication, regulation, and perception in ways that are both measurable and meaningful. Its influence extends into emotional experience, cognitive function, and the subtle processes through which we navigate life. The discovery of approximately 40,000 specialized cells within the heart serves as a powerful reminder that intelligence appears in forms we do not always expect. Sometimes the most important insights emerge when long-held assumptions are challenged. We begin looking at familiar things with new eyes. We realize that what seemed ordinary may contain extraordinary complexity. And perhaps that realization points toward an even larger possibility. If the heart possesses dimensions of intelligence that science is only beginning to understand, then what other capacities might remain hidden within the human experience? What aspects of awareness are waiting to be explored? What potential lies dormant beneath habits, distractions, and assumptions that limit our perception of who we are? The answers may not emerge all at once. They may reveal themselves gradually through observation, experience, and a growing willingness to listen to the subtle dialogue occurring within us every moment. A dialogue that suggests the next frontier of discovery may not be somewhere beyond us at all, but within the living connection between consciousness and the intelligence already present inside the human body. The possibility is both humbling and inspiring. For generations, humanity has searched outward for answers to some of its deepest questions. We have explored distant landscapes, developed powerful technologies, and expanded our understanding of the physical universe. Yet alongside that outward journey exists another frontier, an inward exploration of consciousness, perception, and the hidden systems that shape our experience of reality. The heart occupies a unique place within that exploration because it sits at the intersection of what we feel and what we know. It is constantly translating experience into signals, converting emotion into physiological information that influences the entire body. Every heartbeat carries more than blood. It carries messages. It communicates conditions. It reflects the state of our internal world. What becomes increasingly fascinating is that these messages are not isolated events. They accumulate over time. Repeated emotional states create patterns. Patterns become tendencies. Tendencies influence perception. And perception influences the choices that eventually shape the course of a life. In this sense, our future is not determined solely by external circumstances. It is also influenced by the quality of communication occurring within us. Think about how often people become trapped in cycles they do not consciously choose. A person repeatedly expects disappointment and unconsciously notices evidence that confirms it. Another expects rejection and interprets neutral situations through that lens. Over time, these expectations begin feeling like reality itself. Yet beneath those patterns lies a physiological process involving emotion, attention, and interpretation working together. The heart is deeply involved in that process. It responds not only to events, but also to the meanings we assign to those events. Two individuals can experience the same circumstance while generating completely different physiological responses because they interpret the situation differently. The body reacts to perceived reality as much as objective reality. This insight has profound implications because it means that changing perception can alter biological responses in measurable ways. I often find myself reflecting on how much power resides within this simple observation. If perception influences physiology, then learning to work with perception becomes an important part of personal transformation, not by denying reality, but by recognizing that our interpretation of reality matters. The stories we tell ourselves affect the signals our bodies receive. Those signals influence emotions, behaviors, and future expectations. This is why awareness remains such a central theme in understanding consciousness. Without awareness, patterns continue automatically. We react according to habit. We repeat familiar responses. We assume that our current experience represents the only possible way of seeing things. Awareness interrupts that cycle. It creates space for observation. Within that space, new possibilities become visible. The heart offers valuable feedback during this process because it responds immediately to shifts in perception. A threatening interpretation can trigger tension within seconds. A feeling of appreciation can begin changing physiological rhythms just as quickly. These responses demonstrate how closely emotion and biology are connected. They are not separate systems operating independently. They are aspects of the same integrated process. One reason this connection is so important is that emotional states influence learning. When the body is overwhelmed by stress, attention narrows. The nervous system prioritizes survival over exploration. Creativity often decreases. Flexibility diminishes. By contrast, coherent emotional states support curiosity, adaptability, and openness to new information. In essence, the internal environment helps determine what kinds of experiences become possible. This may explain why personal breakthroughs frequently occur when individuals shift their emotional relationship to a challenge rather than merely changing the external circumstances. The challenge itself may remain. What changes is the way it is perceived. New solutions emerge because attention is no longer trapped within old patterns. The heart and brain begin operating from a different baseline condition. What intrigues me is that many of these changes begin with practices that appear deceptively simple: slowing down, paying attention to breathing, cultivating appreciation, reflecting intentionally. These actions may seem small, yet they influence physiological processes that affect the entire system. Small shifts repeated consistently can create significant changes over time. The principle is similar to the way a river gradually shapes a landscape. No single drop of water creates the transformation. The effect emerges through repetition. Emotional patterns work in much the same way. Repeated states reinforce specific pathways within the nervous system. The encouraging reality is that beneficial patterns can be strengthened just as limiting patterns once were. This perspective changes the way we think about growth. Growth is not always about becoming something entirely different. Often it involves uncovering capacities that were present all along but hidden beneath layers of conditioning and habit. The heart's intelligence may be one of those capacities. Not a mysterious force separate from biology, but a sophisticated aspect of biology that contributes to awareness in ways we are still learning to appreciate. As research continues, scientists are discovering increasingly complex interactions between physiological systems. The boundaries that once separated mind from body appear less distinct than previously assumed. Thoughts influence hormones, emotions influence immune function. Heart rhythms influence neural activity. Each system affects the others through continuous feedback loops. The implications are extraordinary because they suggest that consciousness itself may be more distributed and interconnected than traditional models proposed. Rather than residing exclusively within a single organ, awareness may emerge through relationships among multiple systems communicating simultaneously. The heart becomes a central participant in that conversation. This idea resonates with something many people intuitively sense during meaningful experiences. There are moments when understanding seems to involve more than intellectual analysis. Moments when clarity arrives with a feeling of alignment throughout the body. Moments when a decision feels right not because every variable has been calculated, but because thought and feeling are working together harmoniously. Such experiences remind us that intelligence comes in different forms. Analytical intelligence helps us solve problems. Emotional intelligence helps us navigate relationships. Physiological intelligence helps maintain balance within the body. The heart appears to contribute to all three by serving as a bridge between emotional experience and biological function. The more we learn about this bridge, the more valuable self-awareness becomes. Every emotion becomes an opportunity to understand ourselves more deeply. Every reaction becomes a source of information. Every moment of coherence becomes evidence that transformation is possible. We begin seeing life not as a series of isolated events, but as a continuous exchange between inner conditions and outer experiences. Perhaps this is why the discovery of the heart's complex communication network captures so much imagination. It suggests that wisdom may not be confined to conscious thought alone. It may emerge from deeper interactions occurring beneath the surface of awareness, influencing perception, behavior, and meaning in ways we are only beginning to recognize. And if that is true, then each heartbeat becomes more than a biological necessity. It becomes part of an ongoing dialogue between the physical and the experiential, between the measurable and the meaningful. A dialogue that continues every moment of our lives, shaping how we interpret reality, how we connect with others, and how we discover our own potential. The more closely we listen to that dialogue, the more likely we are to uncover insights that challenge conventional assumptions about consciousness, revealing that some of the most profound dimensions of human intelligence may emerge from the continuous relationship between the heart, the brain, and the vast field of awareness through which every experience is ultimately perceived, interpreted, and transformed into the story we call our life. A story that continues unfolding through countless interactions that reveal yet another layer of understanding about how deeply interconnected perception and existence truly are when we stop treating them as separate domains and begin recognizing them as a single unfolding process of awareness, interpreting itself through the medium of a living body. In that recognition, something subtle begins to shift in the way we relate to every experience. The ordinary starts to feel less ordinary. The internal dialogue between heart and brain becomes more noticeable, almost like tuning into a frequency that was always present but previously ignored. As I continue to observe this relationship, I notice that attention itself becomes the key factor in shaping how this inner communication is experienced. Where attention goes, experience follows. When attention is scattered, the signals between systems feel fragmented, as if the body is speaking in disconnected fragments. When attention is steady and present, something different happens. The signals feel integrated, more coherent, almost as if the entire system is participating in a shared conversation rather than isolated exchanges. This has led me to reconsider what it actually means to listen to the body. Listening is often thought of as a passive act, but in reality, it is deeply participatory. To listen to the heart is to become aware of subtle shifts in rhythm, tone, and internal sensation. It is to notice how quickly the body responds to imagined scenarios, remembered events, or anticipated outcomes that have not yet occurred. The body does not distinguish clearly between what is happening externally and what is being vividly imagined internally. It responds to both with equal sincerity. That realization alone changes how we engage with thought. If imagined experiences can generate real physiological responses, then the content of our inner world becomes profoundly significant. Repeated thoughts are not just mental events. They are signals that shape the ongoing chemistry and rhythm of the body. Over time, these repeated signals begin forming patterns that feel familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for truth. But familiarity is not necessarily accuracy. It is simply repetition. What becomes important then is the ability to recognize when a familiar emotional state is guiding perception without conscious awareness. A subtle contraction in the chest, a tightening in the breath, a shift in posture that corresponds to a memory rather than the present moment. These signals often appear before conscious interpretation catches up. The heart registers them immediately, reflecting a history of experiences layered into physiological memory. As I work with this understanding, I find that transformation is less about forcing change and more about increasing sensitivity. The more sensitive I become to internal signals, the more clearly I can distinguish between automatic reactions and present moment responses. This sensitivity does not eliminate old patterns instantly, but it does reduce their unconscious influence. Awareness itself becomes a stabilizing force. There is also something deeply important about the pace at which this internal shift occurs. The body does not reorganize its long-standing patterns under pressure alone. In fact, excessive pressure often reinforces the very patterns it is trying to change. Instead, coherence tends to emerge in environments of safety, presence, and sustained attention. In such conditions, the nervous system gradually allows new information to integrate without resistance. This is where emotional regulation becomes more than a psychological skill. It becomes a physiological process of creating internal conditions where new possibilities can be received. When the heart rhythm stabilizes, when breathing deepens naturally, when internal tension begins to release, the system becomes more open to change. Not because change is forced, but because resistance is reduced. I often reflect on how rarely people are taught to work with their internal states in this way. Most education systems prioritize external knowledge, problem solving, and analytical reasoning, yet offer very little guidance on how to understand the emotional and physiological signals that continuously influence those very processes. As a result, many individuals navigate life with remarkable intellectual capacity but limited awareness of their internal landscape. When this imbalance persists, decisions can become fragmented. A person may intellectually understand one direction while emotionally feeling pulled toward another. Without coherence, this internal division can create hesitation, fatigue, or uncertainty. The heart continues signaling its response while the mind continues analyzing possibilities, and the lack of integration creates tension between systems that are meant to work together. Yet when integration begins to occur, something remarkable emerges. Decisions feel less forced. Actions feel more aligned. There is a sense that the entire system is moving in the same direction rather than negotiating with itself internally. This does not eliminate complexity from life, but it changes the way complexity is experienced. In this state, even uncertainty begins to feel different. Instead of being perceived as something threatening or destabilizing, uncertainty becomes a space of openness, a space where multiple outcomes exist simultaneously without immediate resolution. The heart, in its responsiveness, continues to provide feedback, but the interpretation of that feedback becomes more grounded, less reactive, more centered. What I find most compelling is that this internal coherence is not a fixed destination. It is dynamic. It requires ongoing attention, ongoing awareness, and ongoing willingness to return to the present moment. The moment attention drifts too far into anticipation or memory, the system begins to fragment again, not as a failure, but as a natural characteristic of a living, responsive organism. This understanding brings a certain humility to the process. There is no final point where integration is permanently achieved. Instead, there is a continual practice of noticing, realigning, and re-engaging with the signals of the body as they arise in real time. The heart becomes a constant reference point, not as an authority that dictates action, but as a participant in a larger conversation of awareness. And as I remain within that conversation, I begin to notice something even more subtle beginning to surface beneath thought itself. a kind of quiet threshold where perception feels less like something being constructed and more like something being received, as if awareness is not only interpreting experience but also participating in its formation in ways that are difficult to capture with language alone, because language itself moves too slowly to fully describe what is happening in real time between sensation, interpretation, and the immediate response of the body. Still, I try to observe it as carefully as possible, knowing that even partial understanding can shift the way we relate to our own experience. In these quieter moments of observation, I notice that the boundary between observer and observed becomes less rigid. The act of paying attention seems to influence what is being observed, not in a mystical sense, but in a deeply practical one. Attention alters physiology. Attention alters perception. And when attention is steady enough, the heart appears to synchronize with that stability, creating a kind of internal rhythm that supports clarity. This is where the concept of synchronization becomes especially relevant. Within the body, multiple systems are constantly oscillating at different rates. The heart has its own rhythm, the brain has its own electrical patterns, and the nervous system continuously adjusts based on incoming information. When these rhythms become disordered or disconnected, experience can feel fragmented. When they begin to align, experience feels more unified. I have come to see this alignment not as a rare state reserved for extraordinary circumstances, but as a natural potential of the human system. It is something that can be influenced by simple, consistent shifts in awareness. A moment of slowing down, a conscious breath, a brief pause before reacting. These small interruptions in automatic behavior create space for the system to recalibrate. What is remarkable is how quickly the body responds to such shifts. Even a slight change in emotional tone can influence heart rhythm variability within seconds. This suggests that the body is constantly listening, constantly adapting, and constantly responding to internal conditions that we may not fully recognize at the level of conscious thought. In this sense, the body is not waiting for instruction. It is participating actively in every moment of awareness. As this understanding deepens, I begin to question the assumption that control is the primary goal of self-awareness. Many people approach personal development as an attempt to control thoughts, emotions, or outcomes, yet the system does not respond well to forceful control. It responds more effectively to informed cooperation. The heart, the brain, and the nervous system function best when they are not being suppressed, but when they are being guided through awareness. Cooperation begins with recognition, recognizing that an emotional state is present without immediately trying to eliminate it, recognizing that a thought pattern is active without identifying with it completely, recognizing that a physiological response is occurring without interpreting it as a problem. This form of recognition creates space for the system to reorganize naturally. Over time, this approach changes the relationship we have with discomfort. Instead of viewing discomfort as something to avoid at all costs, it becomes a signal, a form of information indicating that something within the system is seeking adjustment. The heart often reflects this adjustment process first, through subtle changes in rhythm or sensation that precede conscious understanding. There is also a deeper layer to this process that becomes more apparent with sustained attention. Beneath the surface level of emotional reactions lies a more stable field of awareness that is not easily disturbed by fluctuations in thought or feeling. When attention rests in that deeper field, the intensity of emotional patterns tends to soften, not because they are suppressed, but because they are observed without resistance. This observation changes the relationship between identity and experience. Instead of identifying completely with every thought or emotion that arises, there is a growing recognition that these are events occurring within awareness rather than definitions of who we are. The heart continues to respond, the mind continues to interpret, but something within remains steady even as everything else shifts. From this steadiness, a different quality of perception begins to emerge. Experiences that once felt overwhelming become more manageable. Situations that once triggered automatic reactions now offer opportunities for conscious response. The space between stimulus and reaction expands, and within that space, choice becomes more available. Choice, in this context, is not about controlling every outcome. It is about participating consciously in the process of response. It is about recognizing that even subtle shifts in attention can influence the direction of an experience When the heart is included in this awareness, those choices become grounded not only in analysis, but in a broader sense of internal alignment. As I continue to explore this, I find myself returning again and again to the importance of consistency, not intensity, but consistency. The nervous system learns through repetition. The heart adapts through repeated states. The brain forms pathways based on repeated patterns of attention and response. This means that lasting change is less about isolated breakthroughs and more about sustained presence. In practical terms, this might look like repeatedly returning attention to the breath during moments of tension, or noticing the sensation of the heart during moments of emotional activation, or simply pausing long enough to acknowledge what is happening internally before reacting externally. These actions may appear small, but their cumulative effect is significant. Over time, the system begins to recognize new patterns as familiar. Coherence becomes more accessible. Emotional regulation becomes more natural. The communication between heart and brain becomes less fragmented and more integrated. What once required conscious effort gradually becomes a more stable baseline. Yet even as this stability develops, the system remains dynamic. Life continues to present variation, uncertainty, and change. The goal is not to eliminate these conditions, but to engage with them from a place of greater internal alignment. In this way, coherence does not remove complexity from life, it changes our relationship to complexity. And so as this exploration continues, I find myself standing at a threshold where language begins to feel insufficient to fully capture what is unfolding beneath experience itself. Because what is emerging is not just an idea about the heart or the brain or consciousness, but a lived recognition that all of these are participating together in a continuous process of awareness, shaping itself through rhythm, sensation, and meaning that points towards something still unfolding, still revealing, and still unfolding in ways that suggest there is always more beneath the surface of what we currently understand, more layers of communication happening between the heart, the brain, and the broader field of awareness that we are only beginning to recognize as an active participant in shaping lived experience rather than a passive backdrop to it. As I remain with this observation, I notice that the sense of separation between inner and outer experience begins to soften even further, not by dissolving the distinction entirely, but by revealing the continuous exchange that exists between them at every moment. What appears as outside events are always interpreted through internal states, and those internal states are simultaneously being shaped by the very events they interpret. The heart participates in this exchange through its constant responsiveness, adjusting its rhythms according to perceived meaning, while also feeding information back into the nervous system that influences how meaning is constructed in the first place. This circular process suggests that experience is less like a linear sequence and more like a living loop of interpretation and response. When I observe this carefully, I begin to see that even anticipation plays a role in shaping physiological reality. The body does not wait for events to occur before it begins preparing for them. It responds to expectation. It responds to imagined futures as if they are already in motion. The heart, in particular, reflects this anticipatory state through subtle variations in rhythm that align with emotional projection. This means that what we expect internally can begin influencing how we feel physically before anything externally has changed. This realization invites a deeper inquiry into the nature of expectation itself. Expectations are not merely thoughts about the future. They are embodied patterns that carry emotional weight. They are felt as much as they are thought. When expectations are rooted in fear, the body organizes itself in a state of readiness for threat. When expectations are rooted in trust or openness, the body organizes itself differently, often with greater flexibility and ease. The heart acts as a mirror for these internal projections, continuously reflecting the emotional tone of anticipated experience. I find it increasingly clear that much of what we call reality is filtered through these anticipatory structures. We do not simply react to the present moment. We meet the present moment with the residue of what we have already imagined about it. This creates a situation where perception is layered, shaped by memory, expectation, and immediate sensory input all at once. The heart helps integrate these layers by continuously updating the body's state in response to the dominant emotional signal. As I continue to reflect on this, I begin to notice how often people unknowingly reinforce their own patterns of perception through repetition. A single interpretation of an event can become a template for future interpretations. Once established, this template influences not only how similar situations are perceived, but also how the body prepares itself in advance. Over time, these templates become so familiar that they operate below the threshold of awareness, guiding reactions automatically. Yet within this automaticity lies the possibility of change. The very fact that patterns are learned means they can also be unlearned or reshaped. The nervous system does not lock experience into a fixed structure. It remains plastic, responsive, and capable of reorganizing itself when new information is consistently introduced. The heart participates in this reorganization by adjusting its rhythmic communication in response to sustained shifts in emotional experience. What becomes essential then is not a single moment of transformation, but the accumulation of moments that gradually shift the internal baseline. Each instance of awareness, each interruption of automatic reaction, each moment of conscious breathing or emotional recognition contributes to this gradual reconfiguration. The changes may be subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but over time they begin to influence the overall coherence of the system. I often think about how easily these subtle shifts are overlooked because they do not always produce immediate external results. Yet internally they are significant. A slight increase in coherence changes the quality of attention. A slight reduction in internal conflict changes the availability of energy. A slight shift in emotional tone changes the way the body organizes itself in response to life. These micro-adjustments accumulate in ways that eventually become visible in behavior, relationships, and decision-making. As this process unfolds, there is often a period where old patterns and emerging patterns coexist. This can create a sense of transition where familiar responses still arise, but new responses are also becoming available. During this phase, the heart may reflect both states, sometimes showing variability that mirrors this internal restructuring. Rather than interpreting this as instability, it can be understood as adaptation in progress. Over time, as new patterns become more consistent, a different sense of internal continuity begins to emerge. The system no longer feels as fragmented between competing responses. There is a greater sense of alignment between what is felt, what is thought, and what is expressed. This alignment does not eliminate complexity, but it reduces unnecessary internal resistance, allowing experience to flow with less friction. In this state, perception itself begins to feel more open. Situations that once triggered immediate interpretation now allow for a brief space of observation before response. That space becomes increasingly valuable because it is within that space that awareness can intervene, not to control, but to understand. The heart, in its continuous communication with the brain, supports this space by stabilizing the internal environment enough for clarity to emerge. I have come to appreciate that clarity is not something imposed on experience. It is something that arises when interference decreases, when emotional noise is reduced, when physiological stress is lowered, when attention is steady. The underlying signals of the system become easier to perceive. The heart's rhythm becomes one of those signals, offering feedback that can be felt directly rather than interpreted indirectly. As this sensitivity develops, even ordinary moments begin to feel different. There is a greater awareness of how quickly the internal state can shift in response to thought, memory, or external stimulus. There is also a growing recognition that these shifts are not random, but patterned, reflecting deeper structures of meaning that have been formed over time. The heart continues to reflect these structures with remarkable consistency, acting as both participant and communicator within the ongoing process. And as I remain within this observation, I begin to sense that the exploration is still moving deeper, still revealing new dimensions of interaction between awareness and biology, between emotion and interpretation, between the subtle rhythms of the heart and the unfolding landscape of perception that continues to expand into a field of experience that feels increasingly difficult to reduce to simple explanations. Because the more I observe it, the more it appears that experience is not something happening to us in a linear way, but something being continuously constructed through layered interactions between attention, emotion, physiology, and meaning, all converging in real time to create what we call perception. In this deeper layer of observation, I begin to notice that attention itself behaves almost like a tuning mechanism. When attention is fragmented, the internal signals between heart and brain feel noisy, inconsistent, and easily disrupted by external stimuli. But when attention becomes steady, something remarkable happens. The system begins to settle. Thoughts become less scattered. Emotional responses become more readable. The heart's rhythm often reflects the settling through a more ordered pattern that seems to support clarity rather than confusion. This observation leads me to question the assumption that clarity is primarily a mental achievement. It appears increasingly that clarity is also a physiological state. When the body is in a state of coherence, the mind seems to gain access to more organized patterns of thought. When the body is in a state of stress or fragmentation, thinking becomes more reactive, less flexible, and more narrowly focused. The heart, in this context, is not separate from cognition. It is part of the environment in which cognition takes place. As I sit with this understanding, I notice that many of the experiences people describe as intuition may be related to this integrated process. Intuition is often described as a sudden knowing without step-by-step reasoning, yet it may actually be the result of rapid, non-conscious integration of emotional, physiological, and cognitive signals. The heart may contribute to this integration by continuously feeding the brain information about internal state, while the brain simultaneously processes external data. When these streams align, the result can feel like insight emerging all at once. What is particularly interesting is how often these intuitive moments arise when the mind is quiet. Not empty, but quiet enough for subtler signals to be noticed. In moments of stillness, the constant analytical commentary in the mind begins to soften, and the underlying patterns of the body become more apparent. The heartbeat becomes something that can be felt not just physically, but as part of a broader sense of awareness that includes emotion, memory, and anticipation all at once. I begin to see that much of human struggle comes not from a lack of information, but from a lack of integration. We often possess enough knowledge to understand a situation intellectually, yet still feel conflicted internally because different parts of the system are not aligned. The heart may be signaling one direction through emotional response, while the mind is analyzing another direction based on logic or expectation. This internal divergence creates tension that is experienced as uncertainty or hesitation. When integration occurs, however, something different emerges. Decisions feel less fragmented. There is a sense of internal agreement, even if uncertainty in the external environment remains. This agreement is not the absence of doubt, but the presence of coherence between systems that were previously operating independently. In such moments, the body often feels more settled, and the mind becomes less resistant to action. This leads me to reflect on how rarely people are encouraged to listen to their internal coherence as part of decision-making. Many are taught to prioritize external validation, data or logic alone, without equal attention to the physiological signals that accompany choices. Yet the body responds instantly to imagined outcomes, often before conscious reasoning has fully formed. The heart, in particular, reflects these responses through subtle changes that can be felt if attention is directed inward. As I explore this further, I notice that emotional memory plays a significant role in shaping these responses. The body remembers not only events, but also the emotional states associated with those events. These memories are not stored as narratives alone, but as physiological patterns that can be reactivated when similar situations arise. This means that a present moment is often influenced by past emotional experiences that are being re-expressed through current perception. Recognizing this opens a different kind of awareness. It suggests that many of our reactions are not purely about the present situation, but about layered histories of meaning stored within the body. The heart reflects these layers continuously, adjusting its rhythm in response to signals that may originate from memory as much as from the present environment. Yet within this complexity, there is also opportunity. If emotional patterns can be reactivated, they can also be reorganized. New experiences, especially those accompanied by awareness and attention, can begin to reshape these stored responses. Over time, repeated experiences of coherence can gradually replace older patterns of fragmentation. The nervous system begins to recognize new states as familiar, and the heart reflects this shift through more stable rhythmic patterns. What becomes clear is that transformation is not a single event, but a process of repeated alignment. Each moment of awareness contributes to this process. Each time we notice an automatic reaction without immediately acting on it, we introduce flexibility into the system. Each time we bring attention to the body during emotional activation, we strengthen the connection between perception and regulation. I find it increasingly evident that this process is not about controlling the heart or suppressing emotion, but about developing a relationship with internal signals that allows them to be understood rather than resisted. The heart is not an obstacle to clarity. It is part of the mechanism through which clarity becomes possible, provided that its signals are acknowledged rather than ignored. As this relationship deepens, there is often a shift in how experience is interpreted. Instead of viewing emotions as interruptions to rational thought, they begin to be seen as meaningful data. Fear may indicate perceived limitation. Excitement may indicate alignment with possibility. Discomfort may indicate internal contradiction that requires attention. The heart continuously provides these signals, but their interpretation depends on the level of awareness present. In this way, awareness becomes the organizing principle of experience. It determines whether signals are integrated or fragmented, whether perception is narrow or expansive, whether response is reactive or conscious. The heart participates in this organization by continuously adjusting to the emotional tone of awareness itself. And as I remain in this observation, I begin to sense that even awareness itself may not be static, but something that deepens, expands, and refines through continued attention, as if the act of observing these internal processes is also shaping the very capacity through which they are perceived, revealing that what we are exploring is not only the relationship between heart and brain, but the unfolding relationship between awareness and the living system through which it expresses itself, a relationship that continues to open into a deeper recognition that what we call self is not a fixed structure, but an ongoing process of integration, continuously updating itself through experience, memory, emotion, and perception, interacting in real time. The more I observe this process, the more I notice that even the idea of a stable inner identity begins to soften. Instead of a single unchanging point of reference, there appears to be a dynamic field of responses, tendencies, and states that shift depending on context, attention, and internal coherence. Within this shifting field, the heart continues to play a consistent role as a responsive center of information. It does not define identity in a rigid way, but it reflects the state of the system with remarkable immediacy. In moments of alignment, its rhythms tend to reflect order and stability. In moments of conflict or uncertainty, its rhythms reflect variability and tension. This responsiveness suggests that the heart is not merely reacting to life, but participating in the ongoing construction of how life is experienced from within. As I continue to sit with this understanding, I begin to see that much of what we call emotional intelligence is actually the ability to recognize these internal shifts before they fully manifest into behavior. It is the capacity to sense the early signals of emotional change and to remain present with them long enough for awareness to intervene. In this sense, emotional intelligence is not about suppressing reaction, but about increasing the resolution of perception within the body. When perception becomes more refined, subtle distinctions begin to emerge. A slight tightening in the chest may indicate the beginning of stress before it becomes overwhelming. A gentle expansion in breathing may indicate relaxation before it becomes fully conscious. These subtle shifts are often overlooked in everyday life, yet they form the foundation of how the system regulates itself moment by moment. What becomes increasingly clear is that regulation is not imposed from a single controlling center, but distributed across multiple interacting systems. The brain plays a role in interpretation and planning, but the heart contributes continuous feedback about the internal environment. The nervous system integrates these signals and adjusts accordingly. In this way, regulation is a collaborative process rather than a top-down command structure. This collaborative nature of the system challenges the traditional assumption that the mind alone is the primary driver of experience. Instead, it suggests that experience emerges from the interaction of multiple intelligences within the body. Each system contributes its own form of information, and consciousness arises from their integration. The heart is one of the most consistent contributors to this integration, providing continuous feedback that shapes emotional tone and physiological readiness. As I explore this further, I notice that moments of deep presence often coincide with a reduction in internal fragmentation. When attention is fully engaged with the present moment, the system appears to synchronize more easily. Thoughts become less fragmented, emotions become more transparent, and bodily sensations become more noticeable without being overwhelming. In these moments, the distinction between thinking, feeling, and sensing begins to blur into a unified experience. This unified experience does not eliminate complexity. Instead, it organizes complexity in a way that feels coherent. Multiple streams of information are still present, but they no longer compete for dominance. They coexist in a more integrated pattern. The heart often reflects this state through smoother rhythmic variability, suggesting that coherence is not rigidity, but flexibility within order. I begin to understand that flexibility may be one of the most important qualities of a well-regulated system. A rigid system reacts predictably but struggles to adapt. A flexible system responds to change without losing coherence. The heart's ability to vary its rhythm in response to emotional and environmental conditions may be one of the biological foundations of this flexibility. As this perspective deepens, I also notice that suffering often arises not only from external conditions, but from internal resistance to change. When the system attempts to hold on to a single emotional or cognitive state despite changing conditions, tension builds. The heart reflects this tension through irregular patterns that signal the mismatch between internal expectation and external reality. However, when there is acceptance of variability, when the system allows itself to adjust without resistance, the experience of tension often decreases. This does not mean passive resignation, but active adaptability. It is the recognition that change is inherent to life and that resisting change requires constant internal effort that eventually becomes exhausting. From this point of view, adaptation becomes a form of intelligence, the ability to adjust emotional, cognitive, and physiological states in response to changing circumstances is not a secondary skill, but a core aspect of how the human system maintains balance. The heart contributes significantly to this adaptability by continuously reflecting the current state of alignment or misalignment within the system. As I continue observing, I begin to see that even insight itself may arise from moments of temporary alignment between these systems. When the heart, brain, and nervous system momentarily synchronize, a clarity emerges that feels immediate and complete. It is not constructed step by step, but recognized as a unified understanding. These moments often feel timeless, even though they arise within ordinary experience. What follows these moments is often integration. The insight is not only understood intellectually, but felt throughout the body. The heart responds, the breath changes, and the nervous system adjusts. This embodied understanding tends to be more stable than purely conceptual knowledge because it involves the entire system rather than a single cognitive layer. Over time, repeated experiences of this kind of integration begin to reshape how reality is perceived. The distinction between thinking about something and directly experiencing it becomes more apparent. The value of lived awareness increases relative to abstract analysis. The heart's role in grounding experience becomes more evident, not as symbolic meaning, but as physiological reality influencing perception. And as I remain with this unfolding observation, I begin to sense that what is emerging is not a conclusion, but a continuation, a process that does not resolve into a final understanding, but instead keeps opening into deeper layers of interaction between attention, emotion, and embodied awareness, as if every insight gained reveals another threshold beyond which perception continues to expand into a more refined sensitivity to the subtle architecture of experience itself, where even the smallest shifts in attention can alter the tone of an entire moment, and where the heart continues to serve as a steady companion in that unfolding, offering continuous feedback that guides awareness without demanding control or rigid interpretation. At this stage of observation, I begin to notice something even more subtle about the nature of internal experience. It is not only that the heart responds to emotion or that the brain processes thought, but that both are embedded within a larger field of awareness that is constantly organizing experience in real time. This field is not separate from the body. Rather, it expresses itself through the body, using the heart and brain as instruments of interpretation and response. When I sit with this idea long enough, I start to see that attention is not merely directed outward or inward, it is also participatory. It shapes what becomes foreground and what remains background in experience. A slight shift in attention can bring the heartbeat into awareness, making it feel more present, more vivid. Another shift can move attention outward again, where the heartbeat recedes into the background of awareness, still active but no longer consciously noticed. This fluid movement suggests that experience is constantly being sculpted by where attention rests. The heart, in this sense, becomes both subject and signal. It is experienced directly through sensation, yet it also communicates indirectly through its influence on mood, perception, and cognitive tone. When the heart rhythm is steady and coherent, thoughts often feel more organized. When it is irregular or reactive, thoughts tend to become more scattered or urgent. This interplay reveals that cognition is never isolated from physiology. It is always embedded within it. As I continue to reflect, I find myself drawn to the idea that meaning itself may not be something imposed upon experience, but something that emerges from the interaction between internal state and external input. The same event can carry completely different meaning depending on the emotional and physiological condition of the observer. The heart plays a central role in shaping this meaning by influencing the emotional lens through which experience is interpreted. This means that meaning is not fixed, it is dynamic, it evolves as internal states evolve. What once felt threatening can later feel manageable. What once felt confusing can later feel insightful. These shifts do not necessarily require external change, they often arise from internal reorganization. The heart reflects this reorganization by adjusting its rhythms in response to changing emotional interpretations. I begin to recognize that this adaptability is one of the most powerful aspects of human consciousness that allows us not only to respond to the world, but to reinterpret it continuously. Each reinterpretation alters the internal state, which then alters perception, which then alters future interpretation. This recursive loop is constantly active, shaping experience moment by moment. Within this loop, coherence becomes a stabilizing influence. When the heart, brain, and nervous system are aligned, the recursive cycle tends to produce more consistent and integrated interpretations. When there is fragmentation, the cycle can become unstable, reinforcing confusion or emotional reactivity. This suggests that coherence is not just a desirable state, but a foundational condition for clear perception. As I observe this more closely, I notice that coherence does not eliminate emotional variability. Instead, it allows variability to be experienced without fragmentation. Emotions still arise, but they are less likely to overwhelm the system. They move through awareness more smoothly without disrupting the underlying sense of stability. The heart reflects this difference clearly as its rhythms become more adaptable rather than erratic. This adaptability suggests that emotional regulation is not about suppressing intensity, but about increasing capacity. A regulated system is not one that feels less, but one that can feel more without becoming destabilized. The heart's responsiveness becomes a key indicator of this capacity, showing how well the system can integrate emotional experience without losing coherence. As this understanding deepens, I begin to see how often people confuse intensity with truth. A strong emotional reaction can feel like certainty, even when it is simply the amplification of a particular internal state. The heart magnifies emotional significance, which can make experiences feel more urgent or absolute than they actually are. Recognizing this allows for a more nuanced relationship with emotional experience. It also becomes clear that many internal conflicts arise from competing interpretations rather than actual contradictions in reality. The heart may signal one emotional response while the mind constructs another narrative based on past experience or expectation. These layers can coexist without resolution, creating tension that feels like confusion. Yet when awareness is brought to both simultaneously, the tension often begins to soften. In this softened state, something interesting happens. The need to immediately resolve or define experience decreases. There is a willingness to remain in uncertainty without rushing toward conclusion. This openness allows new information to emerge naturally. The heart, in this context, becomes less of a problem to manage and more of a guide to observe. I find that this shift in relationship changes everything. Instead of attempting to correct or override internal signals, there is a growing capacity to listen without immediate judgment. This listening is not passive, it is active engagement with the ongoing communication of the body. It allows experience to unfold without forcing premature interpretation. Over time, this practice of listening creates a different kind of intelligence. It is not purely analytical or purely emotional, but integrative. It includes both while remaining grounded in awareness. The heart contributes continuously to this intelligence by reflecting the quality of internal alignment, offering subtle feedback that shapes perception and response. And as I remain within this exploration, I begin to sense that even this expanded awareness is still part of a larger unfolding process, one that continues to reveal itself not as a destination, but as an ongoing movement of perception, refining itself through experience, where every heartbeat, every thought, and every moment of attention becomes part of a continuous dialogue that never fully resolves, but instead keeps opening into.
When we step back and look at the ideas explored in the script, one central theme becomes clear. The human body is not just a mechanical system responding to the world, but a deeply interconnected network where emotion, thought, and physiology are constantly shaping one another. The heart, often thought of as simply a pump, appears in modern research as an active participant in this communication loop. And when I say participant, I mean it in a very practical sense, something that continuously influences how we think, feel, and perceive reality in every moment. To understand this simply, imagine your body as a living conversation. The brain is not the only speaker. The heart is also speaking. The nervous system is responding, and emotions are acting like messengers carrying information between them. When everything is in harmony, the conversation flows clearly. But when one part becomes stressed or overwhelmed, the entire conversation becomes noisy and fragmented. One of the most important scientific ideas behind this is something called heart brain communication. The heart sends signals to the brain through the nervous system, hormones, and electromagnetic patterns. These signals influence how the brain processes information. For example, when your heart rhythm is calm and stable, your brain tends to function with greater clarity and emotional balance. When your heart rhythm becomes irregular due to stress or fear, your thinking often becomes reactive, narrow, and less flexible. A simple way to relate this is to think of driving a car. If the engine is smooth, you can focus on the road clearly. But if the engine is shaking or unstable, your attention is divided. You're not fully present. In the same way, when the heart is in a state of coherence, the mind has more capacity to perceive life clearly. Now let's go deeper into what coherence really means. Coherence is not about forcing yourself to feel positive or ignoring problems. It is a state where your emotions, thoughts, and physical responses begin to align instead of conflict. In science, this is often observed as a more ordered pattern in heart rhythms, especially something called heart rate variability, which reflects how flexibly your heart adapts to different situations. Here's a simple example. Think about two people stuck in traffic. One person is tense, frustrated, and constantly thinking about being late. Their breathing becomes shallow, their body tightens, and their heart rhythm becomes more erratic. The other person listens to music, stays relaxed, and accepts the situation. Their body remains more stable, their breathing steady, and their internal state more coherent. The external situation is identical, but the internal experience is completely different. That difference is not imagination, it is physiology shaping perception. This leads to one of the most powerful insights from the script. We do not experience reality directly. We experience reality through the state of our nervous system. Your emotional state acts like a filter. When you are stressed, your brain prioritizes threats. When you are calm, your brain opens to possibilities. This is why the same situation can look hopeless to one person and full of opportunity to another. Now let's talk about something even more practical, emotional patterns. The body remembers emotional experiences. Over time, repeated emotions become familiar states that the body returns to automatically. If someone has lived in stress for a long time, their body may begin to treat stress as normal. This is why change can feel difficult, not because the situation is difficult, but because the body is resisting unfamiliar states. However, this is also where transformation becomes possible, because the body can learn new emotional patterns just as it learned old ones. The key is repetition combined with awareness. For example, if you intentionally practice calm breathing for a few minutes each day while focusing on something like gratitude or appreciation, you are not just relaxing, you are training your nervous system to recognize a new baseline. Over time, your heart rhythm begins to reflect this stability more naturally. This is how coherence is built, not in a single moment, but through consistent practice. Another important concept from the script is the relationship between thought and perception. We often assume we think first and then feel, but in reality, the body often responds first and the mind interprets afterward. A subtle change in heart rhythm or tension in the body can influence the kind of thoughts that follow. This is why emotional states can feel so powerful. They shape thinking before thinking fully develops. A simple real life example is waking up after poor sleep. Before you even analyze your day, your body already feels heavy or tense. That state influences your thoughts, making challenges seem larger than they are. Now compare that to waking up after restful sleep. You naturally feel more open, patient, and capable. Same life, different internal state. So, what can we actually do with this understanding? First, the most powerful daily practice is awareness of the body before reaction. Before responding to stress, Pause and notice your breathing and heart sensation. This small pause interrupts automatic patterns and creates space for choice. Second, practice slow breathing with attention on the chest area. You do not need complicated techniques. Simply slowing your breath and becoming aware of your heart area for a few minutes can begin shifting your internal state. This helps the heart and brain synchronize more effectively. Third, intentionally generate simple emotional states like appreciation. You do not need extreme positivity. Even remembering a small moment of gratitude can shift heart rhythm patterns toward greater coherence. The key is sincerity, not intensity. Fourth, begin observing your emotional patterns without judgment. Instead of saying this is bad, try asking, what is my body communicating right now? This shifts you from resistance into understanding, which naturally reduces internal conflict. Finally, recognize that transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more aware of the patterns already operating within you. When awareness increases, choice increases. And when choice increases, life begins to feel less automatic and more intentional. At the deepest level, the message behind all of this is simple. Your body is not separate from your awareness. It is part of how awareness expresses itself. The heart is not just an organ reacting to life. It is part of the system through which life is experienced, interpreted, and shaped. And when you begin to work with that system, gently, consistently, and consciously, you may start to notice something subtle but profound. The quality of your inner state begins to influence not only how you feel, but how you see the world itself. And in that shift of perception, new possibilities begin to quietly emerge in ways that were not visible before, suggesting that the deeper intelligence you have been searching for has been present all along, waiting in the rhythm of your own awareness, continuing to unfold just beneath the surface of attention as you begin to recognize that every moment is an invitation to listen more closely to the conversation already happening within you. And as that listening deepens, it naturally leads into